Okay, this Troy Davis case is interesting. It's chewy. It's complicated. These things are never simple. And some people would actually say that the system has worked because he keeps going back and forth between court from one to another. Somebody stays his execution. Somebody hears more evidence. But in the end, Troy Davis is back where he was 20 years ago, on death row for a crime many people say he didn't commit. Let's talk about this in greater detail with B.J. Bernstein. She's a criminal defense attorney, and with Professor Michael Radlett. He's a sociologist and a criminologist and a death penalty expert at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with something that I heard you said, Michael, and that is very few people, not very few people, but your chances of being executed if you are convicted of a death penalty crime in this country, you say, is actually very low.
That's correct. There was a study done at Columbia University about 8 years ago that found that about 3/4 of those sentenced to death during the 70s and 80s primarily later had their sentences reduced to usually a life term by the appellate courts. So given a death sentence, many are called but few are chosen. And it's still unlikely that the person will eventually be executed.
Okay, BJ, let's talk about this case for a second. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I wasn't on the jury, and I'm not a judge. But it strikes me that the Pope is involved, got involved in this. Archbishop Desmond Tutu got involved in this. Jimmy Carter got involved in this. Bob Barr, conservative congressman from Georgia, thinks that this should be reheard. A former FBI director thinks this should be, something should be done. Is there something to that when a whole lot of people think that there's something wrong with this conviction and this death penalty being imposed?
You know, I think there is, and that's why the Supreme Court sent it back down. And this really, as you said before the break, a highly unusual move. This judge issued an 178-page decision today, which I've gone over. And it's interesting because this actual decision is going to create more controversy with the very people that you're talking about who have been interested in the case because of some procedure that happened in the court in front of this judge, where the lawyers made a decision to use affidavit evidence. In other words, evidence in writing instead of actually calling the person live. And the judge really slammed the defense attorneys for that. So you're going to have those issues now go up on appeal, which fits into what Michael just said, which is the litigation and these things continue.
Michael, let's just talk about this for a second. How do you deal with the fact that there's a preponderance of evidence, not that he didn't do it or that he's not guilty, but that something seems to be amiss? Of the 9 people who offered sworn testimony, 7 of them recanted. This judge thinks some of those recantations were reliable and some weren't. But at some point, is there some system that allows you to start again and say, maybe this just wasn't done the right way from the beginning?
Well, you know, several points could be made. One is that the 7 witnesses are not exactly people who you and I would hire to babysit our kids. They flunked the babysitter test. We wouldn't hire them to babysit, but we do hire them or believe them when they finger somebody for the death penalty. Secondly, the argument here is basically a conservative argument. You know, conservative people keep saying that the government, you know, can't run the post office, or they can't clean up the oil spill, or they can't be involved in health care. But the one thing that they do seem to say the government can do is make these life and death decisions. When a police officer is gunned down, there's a lot of pressure. Savannah has not the best record in the United States with race relations. So it's kind of an interesting conservative argument that reminds us that the death penalty is a government program, and as such, it's a program that's making these life and death decisions without the godlike skills.
Let's just hear from some of the people involved. I want to hear from the son of the police officer. We never want to forget there's an absolute victim in this, Mark McPhail, the police officer who was gunned down on the morning of August 19th, 1989, and then a relative of Troy Davis who is still on death row. Listen to this.
It only strengthened mine personally and our entire family, because it's only proves to us more that Troy Davis was the one who killed my father.
I wish that we had not had to come back to Chatham County to get that type of you know, hearing, because I don't know if we had that fair and impartial environment back in this county.
Now let me, by the way, the victim's son, McPhail's son, was 7 years old. I'm sorry, 7 weeks old when that murder took place. Let me just give you one piece of this ruling, BJ. You've read it, but let me just give you the one piece that struck me. U.S. District Judge William Moore has said, Mr. Davis vastly overstates the value of his evidence of innocence. Some of the evidence is not credible and would be disregarded by a reasonable juror. Other evidence is too general to provide anything more than smoke and mirrors. There's a flavor to his ruling which was quite scathing.
Throughout, and in fact, what he basically says, if part of the uproar in this case has been everyone, the mantra is 7 out of 9 people have changed their story.
Right.
And therefore something's wrong. The judge is saying, well, when you break down that 7, he finds a little bit of credibility with 2. He knocked out 2 completely.
Right.
And then where he really gets vicious in the order was going after the defense attorneys for not calling 2 different witnesses live.
Right.
One by affidavit, and the other was the man who says that he killed Officer McPhail.
Right, there's a guy who's bragging about this.
Yeah, there's a guy who's bragging about it, and yet he wasn't called, and the judge is really angry about that.
I think we all subscribe, Michael and PJ, we all subscribe to the fact that there needs to be rule of law, and there needs to be systems, and there need to be processes for these sorts of things. But again, what is the answer to those of us who are not trained in the law who say, there just seems to be a lot of stuff around here that says, before we put that lethal injection into this guy and get the wrong guy, what do we do, Michael, to make sure, is this the system working properly?
Well, nobody is arguing this guy should get out of prison, at least with this evidence. They're arguing the sentence should be commuted to life imprisonment without parole. And actually, the last Gallup poll showed that 48% of Americans support life without parole, 47% support the death penalty. So that's not exactly a controversial position. It's also notable that in this case, reasonable people do doubt the guilt. We're supposed to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but you just mentioned, you know, the Pope, Desmond Tutu, Jimmy Carter. These seem like pretty reasonable guys, and at least would indicate that the governor in this case, now Governor Perdue, should save taxpayers in Georgia lots and lots of cash that will be incurred by further appeals and commute this sentence to life without parole.
You know, I'm a Georgia girl, and I'm going to tell you, the Georgia governors tend not to intervene, and I really think that's going to be doubtful here. I think we're back into more road of the courts, and then a question will become of why the attorneys, and part of this is what you're talking about a minute ago, a necessity to game play to preserve life versus had the lawyers didn't have to make that decision and actually just put it up almost as a new trial once again and let jurors decide it. In the end, probably would save us money.
And you're right about that. It feels like game playing to people on the outside. If there's enough going on, let's just do it again and get it right.
Because it's life or death. Because
it's life or death. That's exactly right. Troy Davis does have a couple more chances now. He's got a couple more routes of appeal he can take. B.J. Bernstein, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. She's a criminal defense attorney. Professor Michael Radliff, thanks very much for being with us. He's a death penalty expert at the University of Colorado Boulder. All right, they're cutting through the red tape and